There's a number the retirement industry doesn't want you to focus on. Not 65, not 67, not the Social Security full retirement age they've been conditioning you to accept for decades. The number is 59 and a half. And once people actually understand what changes at that exact age and what it costs them every single year they wait past it, most of them wish they had figured this out 10 years earlier. Here's what nobody explains clearly. Before age 59 and a half, your 401k and IRA are locked behind a wall. Touch them early and the IRS hits you with a 10% early withdrawal penalty on top of ordinary income tax. On a $50,000 withdrawal, that penalty alone costs you $5,000, gone. Not invested, not compounding, just gone as a fee for accessing your own money. But the moment you cross that threshold, the penalty disappears completely. The same account that was a trap becomes a tool, liquid, accessible, tax-managed capital that you actually control. Most people think the earliest realistic retirement target is 62 when Social Security becomes available, or 65 when Medicare kicks in. Those dates come from systems designed in the 1930s and 1960s. They were not designed around your specific financial situation. They were designed around political compromise and demographic averages from a completely different era. 59 and a half is different. It's not arbitrary. It's the exact moment the IRS releases its grip on your retirement accounts. And for most people who've been diligently contributing to tax-deferred accounts for 20 or 30 years, that's when the math actually starts working in their favor. Now, the standard argument you'll hear against retiring at 59 and a half is the 4% rule, the idea that you need 25 times your annual expenses saved before you can safely retire. On $80,000 of annual spending, that's $2 million. On $60,000, that's $1.5 million. These numbers feel enormous, which is exactly why most people assume early retirement is impossible and push the target date out to 65 or beyond. But here's what the people citing the 4% rule usually don't tell you. The 4% rule was built by a man named William Bengen, who was trained as an aerospace engineer before he became a financial planner. When you build aircraft, a 1% failure rate is catastrophic. You engineer for 0 failures. Bengen applied that same extreme conservatism to retirement withdrawal math. The result was a rule with such massive safety margins that it almost never fails in real life, and when it doesn't fail, it leaves retirees drowning in unspent money. The actual data on this is striking. In a study of 115 rolling 30-year retirement periods going back to the 1870s, following the 4% rule resulted in retirees ending with more than double their starting wealth 2/3 of the time. Half the time, they ended with triple. Only 12 out of those 115 periods resulted in running out of money. And when researchers went back and calculated the actual maximum sustainable withdrawal rate across those same periods, the average was over 6%, not 4%. That gap matters more than most people realize. On a $1 million portfolio, the difference between a 4% withdrawal and a 6% withdrawal is $20,000 per year. That is not a rounding error. That is a year of travel. That is the difference between working 2 more years or not. This is the mechanism most people miss. They're being told to save for a target built on worst-case assumptions from nearly a century of market data, which then gets applied as if it's the expected case. The expected case is that you'll die with significantly more money than you started retirement with, not because you were reckless, because compound growth doesn't stop just because you started withdrawing from an account. A $1.5 million portfolio at 7% real returns generates $105,000 per year in growth. You could withdraw $75,000 and the portfolio would still be growing. The math is not as fragile as the 4% rule implies, but the financial cost of waiting is only half the story. The other half is biological, and this is where the calculus gets uncomfortable. Stanford Medicine published research identifying 2 distinct periods of accelerated aging in humans. The first hits in the mid-40s. The second hits in the early 60s. If you're 55 right now and feeling strong, your body is in a relative stability window. Your energy, cognitive sharpness, physical capacity, joint function, all of it is meaningfully better now than it will be in 8 years. That's not pessimism, that's physiology. Think about what you actually want to do in retirement. If the answer involves hiking, traveling internationally, learning to surf, spending long days with grandchildren, or anything else that requires physical presence and energy, those activities have a shelf life. The person who retires at 59 and a half and spends the next 5 years doing exactly what they always wanted to do has extracted something from those years that no amount of additional savings can buy back. Time at peak health is a depleting asset. It doesn't compound, it just runs out. Here's a way to visualize it. Think of your life in 3 stages. When you're young, you have time and health, but not money. In midlife, you have money and health, but no time because work and family consume everything. In a later retirement, you have money and time, but health starts declining. There's a 4th window, narrow and often overlooked, where all 3 overlap. Money accessible, time available, health still strong. For a large portion of people in financially stable situations, that window opens around 59 and a half. Every year you delay is time spent compressing that window from the other end. There's a guy named Tom who kept telling himself he needed 1 more year. He had the savings, he had the plan, but then market volatility would spike and he'd push it back. Then a project at work needed finishing. Then he wanted a bigger cushion. He said 1 more year 3 times in a row. He finally retired at 62. 6 months later, he said the same thing almost everyone says when they finally stop working later than they planned. He wished he had done it sooner. Not because 62 was too late, but because he noticed immediately that the energy differential between 59 and 62 was larger than he expected. 3 years that felt similar on paper felt very different in his body. He was still healthy, he was still active, but the ceiling on what he could physically do had already shifted. Now, the objections are real, and they deserve honest treatment, not dismissal. Health insurance before 65 is the biggest structural obstacle. Medicare doesn't begin until 65, which means anyone retiring at 59 and a half faces a 5.5-year gap where they're either buying individual market coverage or extending employer coverage through COBRA. Depending on income and location, individual market premiums for a couple in their early 60s can run anywhere from $800 to $2,000 per month. That's a real number that has to live in the budget. But here's what most people discover when they actually model it. If retirement income is structured correctly, using tax-efficient withdrawal strategies to manage adjusted gross income, marketplace plan subsidies can reduce those premiums dramatically. People who assumed health insurance would make early retirement impossible often find the actual out-of-pocket cost is far more manageable than the surface number suggested. This requires planning. It doesn't require giving up. On mortgage payments, the math usually looks better than the feeling. If you've been paying a mortgage for 15 to 20 years, the outstanding balance is a fraction of the original loan. The equity, in most cases, is substantial. And retirement income drawn from a $1.5 million portfolio at even a conservative 5% rate generates $75,000 annually. For most people in their late 50s, that covers a mortgage payment with significant room to spare. Some clients choose to downsize a few years into retirement, eliminate the payment entirely, and deploy the equity difference into the portfolio. That's not a sacrifice, that's a strategic move that accelerates financial independence. Supporting adult children is the most emotionally complicated objection. Every family is different, and this is not a place for blanket advice. But one framing is worth sitting with. Your children have 30 to 40 years to build their financial lives. You do not. The oxygen mask principle applies here. A financially depleted parent in their 80s is not in a position to help anyone. A parent who secured their own financial independence at 59 and a half and spent their highest energy decade doing exactly what they wanted is in a far better position for every relationship in their life, including the relationship with their kids. Here's the action framework. 3 steps executed in sequence. Step 1. Stop treating retirement as a fixed date and start treating it as a decision threshold. That threshold is not an age on a calendar. It is the intersection of 2 conditions. Your retirement accounts are accessible without penalty, which happens at 59 and a half, and your sustainable withdrawal rate covers your real spending, which requires knowing both numbers accurately. Most people have never sat down and modeled their actual spending in retirement with inflation adjustments, healthcare costs, and sequence of returns risk factored in. They're operating on guesses. Do the actual math. The target number is almost always lower than the fear-inflated estimate. Step 2. Challenge the assumptions embedded in every number you've been given.
The 4% rule is a floor, not a ceiling. The research supporting it was designed for worst-case scenarios. If you're willing to accept modest spending flexibility, meaning you'd reduce withdrawals by 10 or 15% during a severe market downturn and recover when conditions improve, you can sustain a higher withdrawal rate with very high historical reliability. A 5.5% or even 6% withdrawal rate on a well-constructed portfolio is defensible for most retirement timelines when paired with spending flexibility. That changes the math on how much you need, which changes the math on when you're ready. Step 3. Build the complete picture before you decide, not just the investment balance, the full income picture. Social Security at various claiming ages and what the break-even timeline looks like for each. Healthcare costs modeled honestly across a range of scenarios, not just the best case. Tax-efficient withdrawal sequencing, meaning which accounts you draw from first, in what order, and what that does to your taxable income year by year. These are not complicated concepts, they're simply things that most people never sit down and model because the default assumption is that retirement planning is something you do at 64, not 54. That assumption is costing people years of their healthiest life. The goal of retirement was never to accumulate the maximum possible amount of money before dying. It was to reach the point where your assets generate enough income to fund the life you actually want at the time in your life when you're physically capable of living it. The people who figure this out early realize that working 3 extra years to add another $200,000 to a portfolio that already sustainably covers their spending is a trade they were never required to make. They just assumed they were. 59.5 is not a loophole, it's a structural feature of the retirement system that most people walk past without stopping. The penalty disappears, the accounts unlock, and for a large number of people who have been saving diligently, that is the moment the math tips, not at 65, not at 67, 5.5 years earlier than most people's default assumption. That gap is not abstract, it's experiences that either happen or don't happen, adventures that either get taken or get replaced by a slower, lower-energy version of the same idea. Do the math, build the real plan, and stop assuming the system's default answer is the right answer for your specific situation.